In this episode of Sustainability Matters Today, I speak with Alex Watson, the co-founder of the Climate Cocktail Club London branch and a champion for shaping the conversation on climate change. In 2017, Alex published an article called My Case for Doing Business More Sustainably, where he wrote about the possibility for companies to put purpose before profit in order to create social or environmental benefits while generating enough revenue to be financially sustainable. After completing Al Gore's climate reality training, Alex brought the Cocktail Club, which is a collaboration platform for professionals who want to solve the climate challenge, to London in 2019. Please make sure to subscribe to the Sustainability Matters Today podcast to learn more about other champions of sustainability like Alex. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Alex, thanks for being on the show. Great to have you join me here.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
And are you based in London right now?
That's right. Yeah, I'm in the centre of London near St. Paul's, and nice and cold this morning.
Very nice. Yeah, it is chilly, and that's actually something that I'm noticing as well. We're recording right now in the morning, 8 a.m., which I actually typically don't do. I usually do most of my recordings in the evenings, just for whatever reason. The schedule is a bit easier that way for most people, but morning recordings are really nice. It's quieter, a little less frantic, but it's middle of December. And one thing I'm still getting used to, I don't know, you're probably used to this coming from the UK, is just how dark it gets.
Yeah, it can get fairly depressing, although...
Yeah, I imagine. I was talking to someone from who's near Glasgow, and I gave him a call at around 8 a.m. and he said that the sun hadn't quite come out yet. It was just starting to peek out behind the mountains. But yeah, imagine if you're even further north in the Nordics, it's really dark.
Well, my theory about the winter in London is that it makes the summer all the more fun because people know it doesn't last forever. So
that's absolutely true. Yeah, coming from California, that's something that I certainly appreciate more here is warm weather, much more so than I ever did living in Los Angeles. And speaking of warm weather, you actually came recently from Madrid.
That's right, yes. So I was at the COP, Conference of the Parties, the UN Climate Conference.
Yeah.
And I was there for a couple of days with work.
Yeah, how was it?
It was my first one I've been to, and okay. I guess a couple of observations. One, having sat in on an informal negotiation, realize the task of 60 different, well, in that case, it was 60 different countries trying to move forward on a particular subject is just a bit of a nightmarish one, because obviously everyone's got a say, everyone's got their own piece to add. And so, it kind of made me realize that, of course, it's no wonder that the UN process has taken such a long time to arrive at something in the form of the Paris Agreement.
The Paris Agreement was organized at a
That's
COP.
right. Yeah. So that was the COP back in 2015.
And just for background, just before we kind of go into it further, what exactly is a COP or conference?
Yeah. So it was set up by the UN's climate organization, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and their first one was back in the 90s. And essentially, this is the sort of UN body that was set up to do something about climate change. Now, it was modeled, if you like, on something that the UN had organized before to deal with the hole in the ozone layer, which is to kind of get countries together, come up with some rules to deal with it. But whereas, the ozone layer hole in the ozone layer was being caused by some refrigerant gases that really there was no big trouble in just kind of coming together and banning them internationally. Obviously, banning fossil fuel extraction would create, a huge crash in the economy and disrupt many people's lives in huge, profound ways. So it's not maybe quite as simple as that, as it's proved over the next 20 odd years in that it's quite slow progress to get something. Back at university, I learned economics, and what they say about what my economics textbooks told me about negative externalities, which is to say a company is delivering its products, but may produce something that's to detriment of the environment. They call that an externality. And the way to resolve that is to, bring a regulation across all companies that taxes that externality to incentivize the companies to not pollute in that way. But really, there's no government organizer, there's no world government that could just at one stroke make such a rule. And anything that goes through this UN body that organizes these COP, it has to be agreed by all of the countries. And for some countries, it's in their interest to not have such rules. And so that's kind of the fundamental why there's a kind of fundamental slow nature of the progress on climate change.
Sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare from hell. It's just like you have governments, which are slow as they are, coming together to discuss how all the other governments can go do something to try to change this thing, which no one really understands, and you have to kind of believe in order to actually even take action on it in the first place.
Yes, I mean, and that definitely was my sense of when I dipped into these informal negotiations, is that they were talking about when to schedule meetings, when they get papers for those meetings, and that conversation went on for about 45 minutes. But what I would say is that the Paris Agreement did deliver something. It delivered a clear direction of travel in terms of trying to limit global warming to 2 degrees, with some efforts to pursue 1.5 degrees. And that sets, and also a process by which governments can make their commitments and compare them, and then hopefully increase the ambition on them. So, it has delivered something, which is mostly to just set a framework by which governments and then, the rest of society can kind of plug in towards that goal of limiting.
Yeah. And so since the Paris Agreement, which seems kind of like a momentous kind of coming together, and everyone agrees on the same thing, more or less, except for the US now. But it's been 4 years since that agreement has been made. So these COPs now, is it basically like checking in and sort of how are we getting on to reaching those goals? What else can we do, sort of thing, or what?
That's definitely going to be the emphasis on the next year's one. It's going to be a kind of what they call, a stock take of
5 years.
The countries. Yeah, that's right. But this year, one of the main focus is around setting the rules by which countries can trade carbon emission reductions. So, if given that it's easier to deliver emission reductions, it's less expensive to deliver emission reductions in some countries rather than others. How can that be of assistance in the process of hitting our global target? And there need to be rules that are kind of set around that. So that's the emphasis of this COP. Yeah.
And based on what you saw and dipping in and out of these informal negotiations, and I think you were there for about 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, 4 days. Yeah,
4 days. Yeah. So I'm sure you heard a lot of different people talking in various environments, for lack of a better word. Do you feel like there's any hope? I mean, or is it sort of like everyone's just going in circles, and it really is just bureaucracy trying to overcome bureaucracy,
Yeah, I think that there were a few elements of both hope and despair. What's interesting is, in many ways it feels like a kind of conference, and and it's good for your networking. There's lots of relevant people to talk to, but they also throw in a load of youth activists into the main conference center, not into the negotiations, but that really does kind of change the dynamic, and it means that people, business leaders, but also leading kind of NGO commentators face some pretty upfront and direct questions. How do you sleep at night? And the words to that effect as well. So actually, some of the most sort of powerful moments that I saw were when some of those tougher questions were asked. So I definitely left with some sense of hope. There's, these tough conversations are going on, and people seem to be kind of rowing in the right direction. So, yeah, I didn't leave too disheartened.
Well, that's good. That's really. Well, I'm glad to hear it, because sometimes you hear about these big kind of conferences, and it's basically what you were saying: 60 countries sitting in a room. There's such a wide range of economic levels in terms of what they're trying to achieve, and I'm sure you have a broad range of climates that those countries live in, or are based in, and so it's just how does everyone get on the same page to accomplish this goal? And I'm glad to hear that there is a level of kind of optimism, so to speak, a little bit.
Yeah, and some of that is expressed less as optimism. It's more a kind of, we must do this. That's definitely
Right.
the impetus from the contributions. For example, Greta Thunberg was there, and
Oh, wow.
she gave a speech to, I think, estimated to be 500,000, mostly Spaniards who just gathered to see her. So yeah, I think it's not necessarily a feeling of optimism. It's a feeling of, we must find a way of doing this. And
Did you see her talk?
I did, yeah. So I went along.
What did you think of her energy and kind of just her presentation?
It's very different from many of the corporate speakers that I had heard during the conference. That's for sure.
Yeah, sure.
It's very kind of somber and very kind of well considered. My view is that Greta's been absolutely amazing in moving things forward in people's consciousness and awareness. She's mobilized, over 1 million young people to go out and strike, and those 1 million people have parents and guardians, and those 1 million school children are in communities, in schools, and the effect of that, I think, has been huge in increasing awareness about climate change and the need for action. So I've kind of enormous respect for what Greta has done, and all of the other activists as well working on that, on the kind of young people's movement. And I think, it changes the rest of the dynamic. It changes how countries see things, because some of them are facing populations that are a lot more aware and want to see more climate action. And then also in terms of companies and how they're acting, because they know many of the consumers, both now and in the future, increasingly will want to see companies and buy from companies that are taking climate action that is addressing the urgency that we are faced with. It's not about achieving something by the end of next year. It's about 2030, and the need that, in order to give us a chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, we need to have made a 45% emission reduction across the world by 2030.
Yeah.
So really, I think the school strikes seem to be mobilizing around that goal. It's not now. It's now not a case of Greta on her own. It's a huge movement, but I think it's dragging society in the right direction.
Yeah, dragging is an interesting word. And I think you mentioned something interesting about the kind of, well, at least the way I'm interpreting it is basically it's a signal.
Yep.
Mobilizing so many people is a signal,
Yep.
both to governments, which is very important, and also to companies. And I think that's something I'm really interested in terms of what you do, kind of on a bigger picture, in terms of focusing on how companies and corporations can limit basically
Yep.
what they can do to help with climate change or reducing it, and so on. And you wrote this behemoth of a report, 28 pages, called "Deeds, Not Words: The Growth of Climate Action in the Corporate World." The reason I'm so interested in this, and because when I first started this podcast, I came in with the idea that I guess you can say my hypothesis was that I think individual people have the biggest leverage in terms of change because of consumer demand. As an individual, if I'm starting to buy only organic produce, for example, or I'm sourcing all of my electricity from a green energy provider, then companies are going to start to shift and change towards that, and they're going to start providing that. The more I'm talking to experts and people in the field like you, the more I'm realizing that it's perhaps a little bit more complicated than that, and it's not quite as straightforward. And you really do need someone like Greta. Forgive my American accent on how I'm pronouncing that, but her name. But you do need mobilization, because otherwise it's hard for a company to realize that little Daniel over in London is demanding green energy, and that's not enough. But someone like Greta, who's going out and mobilizing millions of people and saying, we want green energy, we want XYZ or XYZ, then I think companies really start to think, okay, we need to start offering this on a bigger scale, because people will. Well, is that what you're seeing? And as in,
yeah, I think I'll start by saying businesses, whilst they're mostly controlled by shareholders, and of which their investors are big influencers. Businesses are run by people, and people will perceive opportunities and risks as they run their business. Now, that means there are decisions that they can take about people call these strategic decisions. Do you take a move in your business the next 5 years? We want to do this thing, or do we want to do that thing? And where are we going to focus our efforts? And I think if increasingly one of the things that's coming to the boardrooms, to the key decision makers in companies, is around climate change. And I think whilst that's driven by individuals making decisions, be it in their shopping basket, or individual employees maybe writing emails and letters and organizing meetings, I think really, whilst those individual actions do demonstrate something, I think the leadership and the strategic kind of leadership that businesses can take, can mean that action can really leap forward far quicker than purely just mobilizing more and more consumers and more employees around this. So the consumers and the employees are essential to any kind of progress in terms of sustainability within business, because they present a question to the leadership of a company about are our products climate sustainability proof, if you like. But whilst they present them a question, I think it then is incumbent upon the leadership of the company to kind of take a stance and hopefully a leap forward. So, and one example would be a company can offer a sustainable alternative. It could have 95% of its products the same as they ever were, and 5% to appeal to the likes of you who wants to buy a sustainable alternative. And that's really not going to move us forward, as quickly as we need to. So really, what I think is happening, what I'm seeing is that, the fact that there's 5-10% of consumers kicking up a fuss, and also employees, companies are then thinking, well, actually, this in a few years, this is going to be 50-60%. And therefore they take a call that across the whole business, they're going to do things differently. And I think that's what came out in the report. Since the Paris Agreement 4 years ago, the climate actions or commitments to deliver climate actions by 2030 have quadrupled. And that's now means that they're up to 23% of what we looked at, the Fortune 500 Global, which is the 500 biggest companies by revenue. So these aren't just the kind of ethical, organic alternatives. These are the biggest companies in the world. And to have a quarter of them already committed to climate action, we'll go on to maybe the details of that action. But to have a quarter of them either delivering climate action already or committed to do so by this key deadline of 2030, for me is a sign that many companies are taking this leap in what they're doing, and that many of them have done that in the last 4 years.
Yeah. Committing is an interesting word because it's a quarter of Fortune 500 global companies, and this is basically the very first thing that your Deeds Not Words report says is a quarter of Fortune 500 global companies have made a public commitment that they are or will be by 2030 carbon neutral, using 100% renewable power or meeting a science-based emission reduction target. And I think that word commitment is interesting because it basically says it's like an IOU. They're basically promising, but they haven't actually done anything yet.
I agree. There's no guarantee that many of those commitments will land. I think a couple of things to say. One is there was, I think about between 5 to 10% of those Fortune 500 companies are already acting. So they are already either carbon neutral or using 100% renewable power.
Yeah, that's like we were talking about VMware meeting their carbon neutrality.
Yes, that's one example. But I agree that a public commitment to do something by 2030 is, it's something that there's no kind of big penalty if they row back from that, other than the fact that they could be criticised publicly. So there is a small cost for them to back out. So yeah, it's something that we have to watch. But I think even if we just took the ones that have already delivered on those commitments, we're still looking at a significant number. I think by the end of 2020, that will be 10%, and that of the biggest companies in the world across the board is still significant, particularly when you're looking at the change compared to 4 years ago. By no means it's not enough, but I think what the argument we're trying to make with the report is the fact that of these biggest, over the years, these been the most profitable companies because they built up their revenues to such an extent they're in the 500 biggest companies. If they are finding it in their benefit to do these climate actions, then clearly there must be a commercial case for it. These are not just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. Well, some of them might be, but the fact that there are so many of them suggests that that this is now in the commercial benefit of these companies.
That's exactly the point that what I was trying to say when I was saying when I started the podcast. It's exactly what I was going for, is that sustainability isn't sustainable unless there's a financial kind of component to it, meaning it has to be financially beneficial to a company in order for them to be so motivated. Otherwise, it becomes a cost, and it's very difficult to justify to a lot of people, especially at the level of Fortune 500 companies. You're answering to a lot of people. First of all, you have your board, and then you have all of your investors who are looking to you to make money. So the sustainability element needs to, I would imagine, help the bottom line.
Yep.
You had another report, or rather an article called "My Case for Doing Business More Sustainably," where you talk about exactly this. This is really interesting. So sustainability, and when I was talking with Natasha Tuck from VMware, she was saying that at VMware there is a good business case for basically taking sustainability and using it within the company. And she had a couple of reasons why, but I'm curious to know, or rather curious to hear what your thoughts are, perhaps on a bigger scale rather than just at one company, what you see or have seen, especially through your work with natural capital partners.
Yeah, I think I see the biggest two things and the biggest two drivers of the commercial case of being more sustainable are getting customers and getting the best employees. Now, there are others. There are, the financial, the pressure from the investors, as you mentioned, maybe the threat of future regulation, but also some, cost savings that can come from being more sustainable. But for me, I see those two as the biggest. I think, some of that goes back to what I did in a previous walk of life, which is when helping startup ventures to run crowdfunding campaigns. And I saw that in helping, I was helping build the sales proposition for these startups as they went live with effectively their first sales campaign. And many of them had these, social and environmental bits that were part of their proposition because their business was doing things a bit differently. And yeah, I feel that seeing that social and environmental mission and action of those companies really helped get those startups extra, free marketing, got the proposition across to the customers. So I think that's important. And given the jump in awareness about climate change that we've seen as a consequence of what we talked about around the school strikes, I see that benefit only increasing. I think the other one is, again, coming from that public awareness is the thing around employees. And, we have at Natural Capital Partners, we have many clients out over on the West Coast of America, tech companies. And yeah, many of them are, they want to hire the brightest and the best, software developers, I'm sure many other things as well. And they know that those people going into jobs are kind of facing decisions about what they want to do, given that, climate change is becoming more visible to them. So yeah, I see that those two are the kind of biggest drivers. And that's what, as I said, it might not be landing on the company's bottom line to require them to change everything drastically today. But I think those business leaders that are perceiving the opportunities and risks of the business in the next 5-10 years and making decisions about that are thinking, well, we're already seeing this, in terms of the hitting sales and our ability to hire. So we need to make a bigger change that really secures us for the future.
Yeah, it's that's very similar, I would say, to what Natasha was saying in, I think it was episode 2, where I was asking her the exact same question, what is it? And she said, or what is the reason why it's so important for VMware to do, to focus on sustainability, because they have a sustainability division, and at the time they only had 4 people, but they are devoting resource and energy, obviously, to it. And she said the exact same thing, that first of all, customers are now asking. A big part of her and her team's job is to basically go through these requests forms that customers send them to say, okay, tell us about VMware's kind of carbon footprint and what you're doing to mitigate all of that stuff before it's an important factor in our consideration for a vendor. So that's number one. And then number 2, exactly like what you said, again, with employees, she said that more and more, whenever they do interviews with people for any role, that's an important factor that potential employees ask about is, what is VMware sustainable? Yes or no? And, if they have kind of, well, I'm not sure, and, sort of sustainable, not really, people lose interest because there are other companies that are doing it. And like you said, again, going back to the younger people, this is now the workforce. The millennials are really entering the workforce in a big way now. So, and I think for a lot of millennials, sustainability is a very important value with where they work and kind of what they do. So yeah, it's interesting that that's kind of across the board as well.
Yeah, and I think it's not necessarily, I'd say it's not necessarily a value in that, millennials are kind of grown up in a throwaway culture. I don't think sustainability is embedded in many millennials' values, but I think it's more like a pragmatic thing, you're seeing extreme weather events, making you realize this is happening, taking on board some of these, big kind of scientific discoveries about how quickly the climate is changing makes this a kind of more pragmatic thing for this my generation of we don't want to be in a world 30 years down the line where things are extreme weather events are happening incredibly frequently. So it's not necessarily a values thing, it's more maybe a more pragmatic thing now.
Yeah, it's a good point. You did the climate reality training with Al Gore, So quick backup, and normally we're kind of doing this all backwards, but you and I met at the Climate Cocktail Club London edition.
That's right. Yeah.
And I want to hear more about this. I'm curious to I'd like to start with climate reality training and then move into the CCC. But I met someone else there at the Climate Cocktail Club who was also part of this climate reality training, and she was telling me a little bit about it. And I actually had never heard of it, which is a little embarrassing to say. But it when I looked into it, it looked really interesting, and the way she was describing it sounded almost too good to be true. Because but yeah, I'd love to understand a little bit more about what is it, how does it work, and sort of what are you expected to do after the training?
Yeah, so climate reality training was set up by Al Gore, and the way I see it is it's essentially him taking his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, and doing that, that talk, that content in real life with people, spreading it across a couple of days. So generally it's Al Gore going around delivering training, and then there's a number of other sessions, panels, speakers as well. But it's free for attendees. There's real diverse mix of people there from all across the world, but also all ages. 18 to 80, and wow. So the aim is that you understand more about climate reality. So what is happening in our climate, and then what can you do about it?
Sorry, just to clarify, the training, what exactly, the word training to me sounds like military training, or I don't know, I'm somehow picturing like it's not just an educational thing where you're like, oh, that was interesting.
That's fair. It's both educational, it tells you the stats, how climate change works, what it's going to affect in terms of health, economy, politics. But then also it's training you to go and do something about it, and particularly around the communication of it. So, there's you then get given a slide deck, and it's a slide deck that Al Gore's built that you want to, they want you to go and do. And by doing the training, you commit to give in the year that follows your training 10 acts, what they call acts of leadership. And the kind of standard one would be to go to your, be it friends, workplace, a community of people that and deliver a presentation about climate change. So I did a couple of things following that. I actually did a climate reality presentation to the inmates of a prison in North London, where I live. So that as part of the education in the prison, we had a dozen inmates come and learn about climate change. And so I did a couple of different presentations, and then I'd come across the Climate Cocktail Club in Dublin, set up by a colleague and a friend of mine, Tom Popple, and his friend Ray, and they were just finding that informal evening events with a couple of speakers and a few drinks was attracting a lot of people to come and find out more about climate change, meet some interesting people, and I just thought, well, look, London's kind of ripe for this. There's many things going on that get kind of big demand. So I talked to Joe Alexander, who also did the climate reality training with me, and we just thought, yeah, let's go ahead and do this in London, and we did our first event May this year. We had 150 people turn up. We had another 300 on our waiting list.
Wow, that's amazing.
And the next one, we doubled our event size. So we had 300 turn up. Again, we sold out. So, there's big demand for what I would say more informal and fun ways to learn, to process, and to maybe even plot and plan doing something about climate change. And I think for me that it's important because we need to kind of change the conversation about climate change. If you bring it up around a dinner table, everyone's eyes might roll because we're going to spend the next 5 minutes talking about something that's, it's about, threatening our existence on the planet, and it's not a fun topic. We're not trying to, make it super light and fun and funny without having that serious element, but we are trying to make a space where people can have a conversation that they actually kind of want to be a part of, and can both find more things out, but also have a an interesting time of it as well. So we've been having some speakers, we've been putting up some boards and quizzes and games as well, and obviously laying on a few cocktails, and that's the Climate Cocktail Club, and we'll be having a few more events in the new year, no doubt.
Yeah, it sounds like, well, I was at one of them, and it was fantastic. I thought, so I went to the one, I believe it was in early November, if I'm not mistaken, and it was just, the room was buzzing. Everyone seemed to be having a good time. There was like you said, drinks, cocktails, and certainly sounds like a lot less. Well, maybe that's not fair, but it certainly sounds. I was going to say a lot less pressure, but I think it's more casual than delivering a climate talk to inmates. I'm sure there's organizing a massive event like that certainly comes with its own different type of pressure. But I think it's a really great way to, like you said, to have a conversation in a very it's not a very formal setting. You kind of just come after work. The vibe is very friendly overall, and what I liked about it is when I was there, I felt like we're all here together to do something, but it didn't have any sort of like kind of dogmatic feel to it, where I wasn't worried like, oh, here we go, we're about to like go march and demand things to happen and change. It's more, we're here to have a conversation and sort of try to understand how we can work together more effectively. And I think that's a more productive way sometimes to approach them.
Yeah, I think there are things out there that are, here's your action, here's what you go and do. Extinction Rebellion.
Yeah,
you become a part of that if you want to be arrested.
Yeah.
Now that's not for everyone, and there are a heap of other things out there, many of which we kind of signpost at these events on some of these boards about what other things people can get involved with. But we ultimately, we're not in a position to say this is the one thing that's going to solve climate change. And I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier. It's not necessarily about getting one person to take an individual action. I think it's about getting people to see that other people around them are also interested in this, and maybe together, we can kind of do something a lot quicker than just me changing something in my life. Because ultimately, if it's more expensive, if it's more hassle to do many of the low carbon things today, then only a small portion of the population will do them. So I very much of the view that we've got to try and figure out ways of making it easier for kind of everyone to do stuff that's more sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I think that's actually something that I've been That's one of the benefits of talking to so many different people about this. Is I was definitely of the opinion at first that it's all about individual action. What can I do to basically reverse climate change, almost as though as one person can do it on my own. But yeah, we're all in this together, and it's definitely an action or multiple actions that basically everyone needs to take. Excuse me, it comes back to the meme that I keep seeing on Instagram, which is along the lines of, it's not about one person doing everything perfectly. It's more about like a lot of people just doing a little bit, even if it's not perfect, because that creates the momentum that makes it easier for governments and companies to start picking up these trends and making changes. You mentioned the Extinction Rebellion. I know you'll only have a few minutes left, but I'm just so interested what you think about what they're doing, because to me, Extinction Rebellion is well, I always think there's Greta and then there's Extinction Rebellion.
So I think both the school strikers that Greta has inspired and led, and Extinction Rebellion are often kind of bundled in together.
Yep.
They've both done one thing. Both of them have done one thing, which is to increase public awareness about climate change, to start the conversation, to get it in the media. I think for me, the way that the school strikers have gone about things means that they are going to be more successful in the long run. There's a lower barrier to entry. Any school kid could take their Friday off, and whereas not everyone can take a week off and get arrested, and that is kind of how it seems that Extinction Rebellion are kind of pitching themselves in terms of how you get involved. So I think they've been fantastic for increasing awareness, but I'm not sure they're going to achieve through the means that they've kind of set out already, and how they've gone about things. So that's my piece on it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I never really I hadn't considered sort of the long-term sustainability again of that kind of type of action. When I see what they're doing and hear about it, I always wonder, what effect does this have on the people who were maybe on the fence or who are already sort of struggling to believe in climate change, or who think that it's not really important, and then Extinction Rebellion comes in and they disrupt the buses, they disrupt tube, they start disrupting flights. I worry sometimes that it has almost an adverse effect. Yes, it does get into the media, but I sometimes worry that the people who may be on the fence think, "Oh God, here we go, the climate people ruining life for everyone again," and they sort of, you know what I mean? I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's always something I'm a little bit concerned about. Whereas Greta's work is much more peaceful. It really is just about saying we want action, but we're not here to sort of disrupt your life kind of so intensely. My thoughts on that. So as we wrap up here, I'm curious to know, I know we've been talking about kind of what we can do together, but out of curiosity, I know that a lot of people are interested in what they can do individually in order to contribute to the whole. So a question I like to ask is, what can people do on a day-to-day basis, or perhaps more directly, what is it that you do on a day-to-day basis to be more sustainable that perhaps we can learn from?
So I think when I hit 30 and noticed that my belly started to expand a little bit, as age sometimes mandates, I found that avoiding meat was a kind of easy way of eating less. So I avoid beef kind of entirely, but then probably on the meat front, I more just reduce it. I've got a cousin who's a pig farmer. When I go up there, I'm not going to turn down his fine produce. So yeah, that's one thing that I've done, and that's partly out of, as I said, the benefit to my health as well.
Yeah.
I guess I've just stopped buying stuff that I don't need. So that's clothes where I can avoid it, just stuff for my flat, and just more conscious and thinking about, well, probably any item and physical thing that you buy, all the materials that have gone into that, there are carbon emissions that go into that. So those are the things I've done. But I think I do want to just go back a little bit to what we've talked about already, in terms of not taking it all on yourself. And I think for me, this comes from my mum a bit, actually. So my mum was an architect, is an architect still, and she has always focused on low energy housing. And so she's been a big kind of inspiration, and meant that I was aware of climate change from a young age, and talking about it around the dinner table. And I went through a phase where I was saying to her, "Why aren't you recycling this? Why aren't you recycling that? You're meant to be trying to help the planet out." And I think she, in her defense, working long days, coming home to me and my brother, yapping away, if not fighting. And I think, her view is, well, yeah, I want to try and do something that affects, these big new building projects, rather than, just spending my whole life making my own perfect house in order. So I've kind of taken on that inspiration, and it's also been an inspiration for me, in that I remember at 16 being, probably all my mates were off on, holiday to some surf town in Cornwall, which is southwest England, and I was over in visiting a low carbon sustainable development in Sweden. I remember that vividly, because walking around those streets, just seeing all the cyclists, and just thinking, wow, this is actually pretty nice way to live. So I've always had this thing in mind that it's yes, where you can try to do things, but ultimately try to kind of feed in and do something that's part of the bigger picture, and not just tidying your own plot up.
Yeah, I think that's wise words, and a good way to think about it. It's a lot less pressure on you being perfect, which can really freeze a lot of people. So I think that's a great place to end it, Alex. Thank you very much for your time. And where, if people wanted to learn more about Climate Cocktail Club and join the next one, I know also going onto the website that it's rapidly expanding, which is really exciting. So where can people perhaps find you, or find the Climate Cocktail Club, or learn more about the work you're doing, and maybe even join one of the next events?
Sure. So if you go on to climatecocktailclub.org, and if you check out the chapters, which are the different locations that we're running, you can easily get in touch with us there. So we'd really encourage that. That's even if you just want to come along to the next one, or if you want to set up your own. Or anywhere in between. So head over there. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I do encourage anyone listening to join the next event, whether it's in London or perhaps somewhere else in the world, because you'll meet a lot of interesting people who are really passionate about the environment, about sustainability. And if it's something that you want to learn more about, it's a great place to do it. As Alex was saying, there's a lot of speakers. I think last time at the London event, or the London event in November, there was probably like 5 or 10 speakers. I lost track. There's a lot of different people talking about a wide variety, or a wide range of topics. So it's really interesting to hear just different takes on what we can do together to achieve this goal of 1.5 degrees, hopefully, rather than 2. Yeah, on that note, Alex, thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we were able to connect.
Thanks for having me, Daniel. It's been great to chat to you.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to learn more about Alex Watson and the Climate Cocktail Club in general, you can find them at climatecocktailclub.org. They have chapters that are all over the world now, so see if you can find one near you. You can also follow them on Instagram at Climate Cocktail Club. You can check out all their latest updates. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, and that way you'll be the first to know about new episodes. Also, give us a 5-star review on the platform of your podcast listening choice. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe there as well so you can be up to date when the next episode comes out. So once again, thank you so much, and looking forward to speaking with you soon.